Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
It's a human institution. It's from the very beginning. In our scriptures we read that God created it right at the beginning. He created the world, and He created men and women, and then He commanded them to come together, to be joined in a partnership, and to be fruitful and to fill the earth.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Dr. David Doan, a psychologist from Perrysburg, Ohio. The topic of this week's Reflections is marriage as an institutional reality. And now, here is Father Bacik.
Well, Dave, I'm glad that you've taken time out from a busy schedule to speak with me a little bit about the whole question of marriage. Now, you, I think, come at that from two different viewpoints, as I see it, as a married man and as a psychotherapist. Do you want to say something about that combination?
Oh, gee. I don't know what to say.
You are married, right?
I am married. I'm married 11 years, and been in practice for 12 years as a therapist. In the one setting, I know about people, and I learn from people, and I offer something good to people, and that's in my professional role as therapist. And in the other role as husband at home, I suppose I'm as lost and make as many mistakes as most every other married person.
That's, I think, often the case, isn't it? I think of myself, too. I do spiritual direction for people, and I'm thinking there a lot of times I have a pretty good idea of where I think these people ought to be going, or I'm not loath to offer advice and so on, and one wonders whether one takes it all seriously oneself. I guess that's why all of us need a confidant or our own director or guide in addition to doing that for other people.
And I think that being lost is important. You know, it's in being lost that we learn and we grow. And I'm not opposed to being lost or being confused. I think that's a good starting point. I mean, I learned a long time ago that confusion accompanies growth, and tension accompanies trying to stay the same, trying to fight change. Mm-hmm. So when I'm confused, I pat myself on the back, and it doesn't last long. I mean, or when I'm struggling, when I'm in the midst of a hard time, I'm just aware that there's a positive side to that. There's a learning side to that, and I am learning.
And I think that, well, as you said, that's the growth in life, and that's the beautiful part of human existence, really. Mm-hmm. I would suspect, too, that you find yourself drawing on your experience as a married man in doing your counseling or dealing with marriage problems. I think that's just natural enough.
Certainly do, all the time. My wife and family are present with me in every session that I'm in.
I suppose from the other side, I'm sitting here talking to you about this topic of marriage, and I have to reflect on that as well. And I know marriage only as an outsider. I'm not married myself. However, I do a lot of marriage counseling and deal with a lot of family situations, and that gives us still another perspective to it. I think that very often persons like myself, we tend to see marriage from the problem side. Because most of the people who knock on my door do not come in and say, I want to tell you how great my marriage is going. Well, usually they're wanting to come in and say the problem areas that they're dealing with. They're looking for some sort of advice or a shoulder to cry on or an ear to listen for a while. So that I think that has to be factored in as well. I don't think that rules me out as a dialogue partner on the question of marriage. It just simply gives me a different perspective on it. Well, with that in mind, Dave, let's talk a little bit about marriage as an institution and how it fits into the whole overall cultural setting. I'm thinking about the history of marriage really is one in which it is an essential function within the societal makeup, that marriage was a way that families related, it was a way of carrying on the culture, it was a way of keeping the society in order. It's a human institution. It's from the very beginning. In our scriptures we read that God created it right at the beginning. He created the world, and He created men and women, and then He commanded them to come together, together, to be joined in a partnership, and to be fruitful and to fill the earth. So that when we begin to talk about marriage, it's not first of all a religious thing or just a Christian sacrament. It's a human reality. It's common in all cultures and has been extremely important to people as to carrying on the culture and to maintaining some order in society and so on. So I was thinking that maybe we could begin to look at marriage along that line of an institution and to see what we might learn of it that way, because I think it remains that. I mean, in the modern world, we think of it in a different way. We think of it as it's a personal relationship. It's a free choice of people to enter into a partnership or friendship, but it doesn't lose that larger cultural import, it seems to me. Is there anything that, as I'm talking, or anything that strikes you, or do you want me to continue on?
I was reflecting back to my own marriage of 11 years ago, and which was in a Catholic church in the Byzantine Rite, and being told that what's happening through this ceremony and process is the taking of a natural union and raising it to a supernatural. Taking of a natural phenomena and religiousizing it, so to speak. And as you spoke about the institution of marriage, I was thinking of marriage from the two aspects of the legal marriage and the emotional marriage. And they're two different events, two different experiences. I think of we get married legally, but we become married emotionally and psychologically. And becoming married is something that takes a long time.
It's really a process.
It's a process of becoming married. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, people become more married over the course of years that they are together married. That two people who are married 5 years have managed to become more married than two people who are married 1 year.
It seems to me that's an idea that was not common in the traditional cultures, and maybe still gets lost. We often think of the wedding ceremony as being the high point and almost the ending point for some people. It seems to go downhill. I saw some statistics the other day from an English psychiatrist by the name of Jack Dominion was using them and talking about the fact that marriage begins to go downhill from the first day after you're married. That there begins to be a loss element in the whole relationship. Well, that's a pretty frightening thing. That's a statistical statement, and I think what you're talking about is an ideal and some other way of looking at marriage. But marriage in the past in the cultures was not even joined with love very often. It was seen as an institution to procreate. The reason they had it was especially was to make sure to ensure the population, that the people wouldn't die out. And through a big part of human history, that's been a problem. Could we have enough people to fill the earth? And would the plagues wipe us out and so on? And so you can see why that was the dominant kind of outlook on marriage. In fact, it's a whole lot of that idea of that you say legal. Marriage is a legal contract in a way. Mm-hmm. Has worked its way into Christian thinkings about marriage as well, and often been the dominant kind of point. The institutional side was there, and why did you have the institution? To propagate, so that that became the major reason, the purpose or end of marriage. A lot of the talk in the early church was along that line. Mm-hmm. As you said, the church Christianized the institution of marriage, the whole secular human reality, tried to put it in a context that was Christian, a relationship to Jesus Christ. And as a result, sort of bought into the Stoic idea and the general philosophical idea that marriage was an institution for passing on the heritage and for propagating the human race.
Yeah, and there's been a lot more introduction lately of marriage being for the purpose of growth, of two people enriching their lives, and that practical side of raising children and providing a framework for children is certainly still there, but I think it seems to have been enlarged, at least in our thinking, that the legal marriage is providing a framework also for two people to grow together and learn together and get emotionally enriched together as persons, and to provide a framework within which people can actualize.
That's truly one of the important parts of marriage. I think that's what we're recovering today, is more that personal side. And but I think the emphasis I'd like to have here is that the cultural matrix makes a difference in terms of that relationship. Let's just take one example, like the feminist critique of marriage. I mean, one of their ideas is that marriage, of course, grew up in patriarchal societies, and marriage was seen as a contract by which two families made an economic agreement, and very often the woman involved was not seen as a partner or as a friend, but was really part of the goods that the man possessed. And therefore, in making a marriage, that was the dowry idea. She brought certain goods into the marriage, and she was considered more like an object or a thing. And so that even the divorce laws that we see in the early church, the idea of saying, well, we shouldn't get divorced, it was bringing more of a humane element in to that very difficult situation where the woman was a non-person, really. And it was trying to humanize it or Christianize it. But it kept the same patriarchal framework. It was still a question that the man was the master. In fact, we have a lot of sayings of the theologians along that line, that just as God is head of the whole human race, so the man is the head of the woman and is in charge of what goes on, and he makes all the big decisions and shapes the direction of the family, and then that leaves a more private realm to the wife in the relationship. She's to take care of the children and to bring some love into the relationship and so on. But so all the way up into our own time, I think we still see the effects of that traditional, cultural, patriarchal understanding of marriage. It's got a lot of sexist overtones to it. And so today, I mean, you begin to say, well, that needs to be challenged in many ways. I'm wondering, as I'm talking here, if you see the residue in your own practice along that line of women still being treated that way in more of a contractual relationship.
Well, I certainly see it happen, and it's in our thinking, and a lot of men relate to women as and their wives as this is my property, and get excessively possessive or dominating of the husband. I also see it happen in the other direction, and there are an awful lot of marriages and families in which it seems that it's really a matriarchal situation, in that the family is being run by the wife and the mother, and organized around the wife and the mother, and she's intimately and intensely day in and day out involved with the home life and with the children, and the man finds himself rather on the outside, and sometimes looking for ways to get in.
It seems, that's the flip side of this, isn't it? It seems as though what the patriarchal society set it up this way, that the marriage would take place, and the husband was the linkage with the outside world. He was the one that went to work, that earned a living, brought the money back into the home. He was the one that was concerned about politics and cultural affairs. He was a man of the world, etc. Whereas the role of the wife was reduced to a private sphere. She was the one that was to take care of the domestic side. She was to stay home, to bear the children, raise the children. She was the one who would try to humanize that whole thing. And it seems to me that with that division of labor, as we saw it, very often it was the mother then who made the emotional bonding with the children. And your phrase was interesting to me, that then the husband was sort of the outsider in that situation, and often trying to figure out how to get in. And I think we see marriages today. I do marriage counseling where that's precisely the problem, even today.
Yeah, and you have women who are looking for a way to get out, looking for a way to have more contact. I mean, I think a common symptom of women and mothers over the years becomes symptoms of battle fatigue. They're overburdened with home life and home responsibility. And a common symptom of men, husbands, who are busy earning a living and on the outside of their own family to too big of an extent oftentimes, are symptoms of isolation, where they become a stranger from their own children, their own wife. And both of those two get extreme and need to be pulled back to the center. I heard a good metaphor of the family. The family is a wheel where the mother is the hub, the children are the spokes, and the father is the rim. Which reflects that idea of the father being the contact with the outside world, the interface with the outside world, and the mother's really in the center, very much in the center. And there's a lot of positive to that for her and for everyone involved, but there's also a downside to it of, it's easy for mom to get overburdened and buried in all of that private world.
What we're seeing, of course, today with the feminist critique is that marriage today can't work like this. That what we've got is a lot of young people, at least that I deal with, who say they want to go into marriage on the basis of a partnership or a friendship. But the cultural factors keep tugging at them and almost making it impossible for them to accomplish it very often. In other words, how do you form marriages that are really mutually enriching in a society that still is so sexist? I mean, it seems to happen in very clear ways. One is that very often the young men involved go into the marriage with the models of their fathers in mind. And very often that previous marriage was exactly one in which you still had a patriarchal setup. The husband was the head of the family, made the big decisions, and the wife was more passive and subservient. And very often she was the one who made it work in psychological terms. In other words, she was the one on tiptoes, or she was the one making the extra sacrifices, or trying to look out, make her husband look good in public, try in various ways to keep him happy so as to keep the relationship going. It became her sort of duty along the line. So we got young men who saw their fathers act like that, and their mothers. They go into marriages thinking that, well, they want to do it differently, but the old cultural models are still at work in their head, and very often just emotionally, psychologically, seems to me they can't pull it off. They speak a good game, but they revert back to the old methods and the old models that they know.
What you're saying reminds me of something that Carl Whitaker, a noted family therapist, says that every family produces agents or scapegoats to go out and reproduce itself. And you get two agents from two different families who meet one another, boy and girl, get married, and then spend the next 40 years or so arguing and fighting over which family they're going to reproduce. Is it going to be his family, or is it going to be her family?
That's good.
And hopefully over time they develop their own family, their own identity.
Yeah, so they have to be able to move beyond that stereotypical role-playing. I mean, you could do the same analysis that we were talking about here from the woman's side, too, because very often they grew up in families where they see their mothers as playing that more dependent role and being the force that keeps everything together, and they think that that's what their job is as well, and that they carry that on. They bring a certain passive dependency to the situation. Now, the marriages I have in mind are the ones who want to move beyond that. In other words, most of the young people I talk to who are getting married these days say they don't want that. They recognize that there's something wrong with that. They want to move beyond it, and they want to form this partnership, but the cultural factors still inhibit them very often. I'm thinking of other ways that works, just in terms of the amount of money that the two make. Say they both are in the workforce. Very often it's the husband, for societal reasons again, who makes more money. What that means is that when it's time to move, when he has to change jobs, or they're both thinking of changing jobs, very often it goes in his favor. That is, you're going to move where he wants to go or where he can get a job. Why? Because he makes more money. It makes perfect sense. And yet the woman very often is sitting there upset because why do I have to move? Why do I have to give up my job? I like my job. Why am I the one that always has to go? I remember dealing with a couple in a very striking way like that they sat down, talked it all out, very reasonable. We'll move where your company wants you to go, the wife says. But when it came to doing it, she was just frustrated and upset and couldn't deal with it, didn't understand why, till she finally got it out in the open that she was angry about it because the culture had done her in. Society didn't really allow her to be a partner as she really wanted to be.
Yes, especially if she is working just as hard as the husband, and probably is, and has a job that she finds meaningful, and yet is making less money than he is.
Yeah. And that's pretty common these days.
Sure
Again, it's a societal question. It's I think, the residue of the patriarchal society as we see it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this in a more positive light, this idea of working outside the home. that really work and career is a linking into the larger culture, so that that's the way people have of improving the society. I think we could develop here a whole understanding of work as making a contribution to the world, of helping to spread the kingdom in the world, and so on, so that out of that close partnership that we like to see in marriage, I guess we'd like to think of the people nourishing one another and strengthening one another so that they can live a broader life and make their contribution in the world. And I think that I see that happening, I think, in a lot of good marriages where people have a fine relationship with the larger society. It enriches them. By going out to work, they make their contribution and they come back as more interesting people. Don't you find women, for example, who have worked so long and hard in the home, then take a job working out in society, very often feel as though they have more to contribute now to the personal relationship with their husbands?
Sure, and they've also, in that scenario you just described, they've also completed a job well done if they've been at home for a number of years, raising the children, and they're ready to move on. They're ready to do something else, and they take a lot with them, oftentimes a lot more than what they're aware of. And they have something different than the men that are out there to offer. I think that it's
they have to learn to trust their own experience that way, right?
Yeah, and it's important I think for women to maintain what they're good at and what they're. Women. I believe that women are more emotionally oriented, and
I think there's some feminists are not going to like that, but go ahead.
Well, I think it would be better for women to continue to let men be influenced by them and improved by them, rather than for women to become more and more like men, especially in ways that men themselves would do well to change.
Want to give an example of that?
Well, men get overly cold, overly factual, overly objective, overly thing-oriented, overly conquer-oriented, overly goal-directed. And women tend to be more affectionate, more emotional, more process-oriented. And, those are qualities that are positive. And I liked when women stick to those qualities rather than in some way give them up to become more like men.
So, the perfect example would be to pick up the whole competitive side of things. In other words, what you're saying is that as women go out from the home and enter into the larger society, you don't want them to have overly competitive ideas. You'd like to see them bring a more cooperative spirit to the enterprise they're involved in, or the work site, or whatever their careers are all about. In other words, what we've done, I think, again, in societal terms, we've taken some sort of an ideal of a rational, controlling, competitive understanding of human existence and made that the model. Apart from males or females, that's just been the way you make it in society, and that's what's looked up to, and we sort of praise that sort of behavior. And what I think you're saying is, if I try to put it in more palatable terms, is that nobody should be forced to buy into that model. That people, males or females, ought to be able to be true to themselves and maybe find within themselves a more cooperative mode of living and less competitive attitudes, and to bring those to the work site, to the society, to the larger world. It would seem that in families, isn't that true, that in the relationships, we'd like to see that relationship be more cooperative, and you learn it there, then you would take it out to the world. Maybe that's one way of saying the point that you're making here. Women have learned to make things work in the family. That's been their job, to hold it together traditionally, and I don't think that should be their only task, or they shouldn't be the only one charged with that within the family, but they have done it, and maybe they've learned skills in that they can well bring to the larger society when they move out from the family setting. Does that sound like a reasonable way of saying that, or do I blunt your point too much?
Well, I'm not in favor of women holding together a family. And I think women and wives and mothers can continue to be emotional, intuition oriented without it being their responsibility to hold together the family. I think that'd be a good responsibility for them to share, and for it to be everyone's job in the family to hold together the family.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
And when they go out then, what we'd hope is that both males and females would learn something from that sort of healthy family life and be able to translate that into the world. I mean, that would be sort of this reversal. In the traditional societies, the whole structure was there. It was patriarchal, it was sexist, and marriage fit into that. And so what we're sort of moving in a direction here of saying, if we saw the modern marriage that's more partnership-oriented and mutual and equality-oriented, then if we had that, then out of that situation we could begin to enrich the culture. We would see marriage as the factor that is influencing the culture and not simply that which is responding to the cultural norms. It might be a way of radiating outward, of thinking of how we're going to improve the world in a way.
Mm-hmm.
The good family becomes the model of how society could work.
Mm-hmm.
As someone has said, it's the most humane institution that we've set up. It's the most efficient institution we've ever set up in the history of the world. It works better than anything else, and it gets things done. And so maybe if you turn it around, we begin to see that it could enrich the whole way life is carried out. Any of that resonate with you at all? I mean, does it sound real in any sense? I mean,
Sure.
you compare the family, I mean, and marriage, I mean, to other institutions like governmental agencies or something, and I think you can find that there's a greater efficiency and a more humane way of living there that sounds like it might be good and help us to work better. Well, Dave, we've been trying to talk about marriage as an institution, as a cultural factor, and I think that the dominant point that I'm getting out of the discussion is that the culture influences the way marriage is carried out. And when the culture has certain contradictions in it, like patriarchy and sexism, makes it harder to form relationships of mutuality. And therefore what we've got to see is to try to find ways to overcome that, to build up the more partnership model of marriage, and then that in turn maybe reflects outward. And then we get more of an idea of marriage really being a sacrament, as we say in Christian outlook. Then it represents more of God's will for the human race, in which I think the great God expects us to live on the basis of care and love for one another.
You've been listening to Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik talked with Dr. David Doan, a psychologist from Perrysburg, Ohio. The topic of this week's Reflections was marriage as an institutional reality. If you have any comments on today's show or suggestions for future programs, please write Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Ministry, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio, 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Commission of the Diocese of Toledo.